everybody. She'e Heather Fleming Inishia, and I'm the Executive Director at Change Labs in Tuba City. Thank you all so much for joining our first workshop of 2022. We have a very exciting speaker joining us today, but before we get started, I wanted to give you all a very quick introduction to Change Labs. I recognize a few names on the list joining us today, so for some of you, this may be some repeat information, but for those of you who are unfamiliar with our organization, we are a Native-led nonprofit located in Tuba City, and we're providing creative workspace tools, resources, and knowledge to Native American entrepreneurs. And there are couples of ways that we do that, but some of the most popular questions that we get from people coming to Change Labs, first and foremost, it's how do I start a business? And that's our bread and butter. That's what we do. We try and help Native entrepreneurs, change makers, vendors, artisans, both start up and strengthen their businesses. So if this is a question that you have, there's a few things that I recommend. First and foremost, definitely go and check out our business coaching. We offer this every Monday. It's free. It's virtual for now. There are 90-minute appointments that we offer between 11 and 5. And we have a whole slew of fantastic coaches that you can sign up for a time slot with. Jessica Stego, Christine Laughter, Marsha Gray Eyes, Trish Rensink, and they each have different expertise depending on what you're looking for. So if it's marketing versus understanding things like accounting and bookkeeping systems, or maybe you need help creating a business model, each coach has a different area of expertise, and I highly recommend that you go check that out. I'll put some links in once I'm finished talking here. And then the second thing that you all should know about is our business incubator. Our Change Labs runs one of the only Native-led business incubators for Native entrepreneurs in the United States, and we're right here in Arizona. And the applications for that program are going to open in about 2 more weeks. I think my colleague Jessica Stego is on the line, so if you have any questions about the incubator, go to our website /incubator, and Jessica is going to be hosting an information session on January 19th. I think that's a Thursday, where she's going to be answering questions, talking about the application process, and all the stuff so that you can be ready when the applications open on the 31st. That is a super cool program, so definitely check it out. Another extremely popular question that we get is, how do I create a website? So along that line, at some point, we'll go back to hosting open studio hours with some of the artists in our community and the designers. But for now, I definitely would suggest that you head over to our YouTube channel. I'll put in a link for that in a second too. But we have so many videos there on social media marketing, website design, that are all led by Native entrepreneurs and creatives who specialize in those things. So it's just this wonderful archive of knowledge from Native creatives, and definitely go and check that out. And then finally, we always get questions on, how do I get help running my business? I mean, there's so many aspects of being an entrepreneur. And for those of you who are in Tuba City, you'll know that we had a co-working studio on the Moenkopi Legacy Inn campus for these past few years. Construction on our new headquarters that's located right next to the Tuba City chapter is underway. So starting summer 2022, we'll have a new creative co-working space for you all, where you can come in, use a desk space, access Wi-Fi, get color printing. We have button makers. We want to bring our workshop series back to in-person in those new facilities. It'll be an exciting community space for you all to use to help improve and boost your business. And then finally, there are so many Native accountants, designers, marketing specialists, social media strategists out there. And we've been curating our own list of them. And it was a few years ago that we thought, why aren't all these resources online somewhere for people to access them? So if you're in the market for finding other Native service providers who can help you with your business, check out resrising.org. We have more than 600 Native American owned service providers and product makers listed in there, who we think are fantastic resources for helping start up and run your business. Okay, that's my Change Labs spiel. If you have more questions about Change Labs, you can email us, specifically my colleague, Marcia. That's her email address up there, and there's our website. And I'm going to put a few links in the chat window in a second. Before we dive into our speaker today, or not dive into her, but dive into the sessions, there's a few general things that I think we should all keep in mind. Please stay on mute until Q&A, or until our speaker Tracie says, like, is there any questions? That's just so that we can block out barking dogs, babies crying, that sort of stuff for the recording. Yes, this session is being recorded on YouTube, and it should be up probably in the next 2 to 3 days. The fantastic Happy Accidents Media, run by Kelsey Lee and Co. They do all our video editing, and we give them a few days to get that done before we post them. And they're our guests here too. So shout out to Happy Accidents Media if you guys need any video production. If you have questions for our speaker, no, don't worry about holding on to them. Just type them up in the chat window, and Christine or I can gently interrupt our speaker if it's an urgent question, but otherwise there's usually a little bit of a Q&A session at the end. Last few announcements before we get started. We are hiring. If you are interested in helping build the startup and entrepreneurship community on Navajo and Hopi Nations, come join us. We're at /jobs. I think there's like 4 or 5 job openings there. Creative offerings, business coaching, definitely check it out. And now, while you're actually here, I am so pleased to host Tracie Jackson today from Nike. I heard about Tracie through our mutual friend, Brian Skeet. He's another fantastic Navajo graphic designer who does a lot of work with Change Labs. And I had no idea that there was a badass Navajo person working at the Nike N7 program. I've been a huge fan of Nike N7 for a while. I have a lot of their kicks. If you're not familiar with the brand, I'm sure Tracie's going to talk about it, and I'll post some links. But what I've learned about Tracie is that she is the first Indigenous designer that is fully dedicated to the Nike N7 program. And I cannot imagine a cooler job, frankly. She gets to do a lot of storytelling with Indigenous communities, and she's a design-driven creative person. And she's joining us today to share a little bit about her storytelling techniques and things that all of you guys as entrepreneurs, change makers, community organizers, tools that you guys can use to really engage your audience. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Tracie. We're going to do a little bit of an awkward tech exchange here while she shares her slides. So just give us a minute here, but welcome, Tracie Jackson, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very happy to be here and really excited to share Indigenous storytelling, because it is something that we all know and we all have been a part. If you hear your families tell stories, or they're little gossiping. So I'm really excited to share basically how I do that at Nike. So let me just pull up my presentation really quick. Yat e she Tracie Jackson yinishe, sina jeni nisha, bilagana bushashin, kiani dashache, do bilagana dashanella. I just want to say thank you everyone for having me here today. Very excited to be here and share this with us. I don't know how many people know that I'm actually behind the scenes in design at N7. So really excited to, surprise people, and also just like show you the back end. If you've seen this product or seen any of the stories that we've told, through the Nike side, like I'm really excited to show you like the behind the scenes of how to, I come up with ideas and how do I kind of envision these stories coming to life. So thank you for participating in Culture, Sport, and Design, an intro into Indigenous storytelling with me. Just really wanted to get into just tell my story really quick, a little bit about my background and how I ended up at Nike and N7. So I grew up on and off the Navajo reservation. I am originally from Chejentah, Star Mountain area. Currently, I live around Tisto Delcon area where my Che is from. And then I grew up in Flagstaff, so went to school there, graduated from Flagstaff High School. My first introduction to N7 was when I was about 13 to 14 years old. I used to play in a bunch of Native basketball tournaments across the res, and I played in this one tournament, if you might be familiar with it, the Lore Payestva tournament in Phoenix. And that's where I actually first saw N7. I saw the logo of the medicine wheel with N7 inside with the swoosh back then, and I never knew what it was because growing up, I love basketball, I love sports, played basketball my whole life. And then at the other side of the end, I was a fourth generation Native artisan. My grandparents and my mom are silversmiths. My aunts are beaters, also designers. And then my great grandmas are both Navajo rug weavers. So, art is something I've always done. It's always been part of my family. It's their full-time job. So I always grew up going to art shows. And so seeing the N7 logo was kind of like the mix of both, like sport and culture design coming together. And I never really knew what I wanted to do and in the future at that age until I saw that logo. And so at 13, 14 years old, I made it my goal to work for N7. I said I wanted to be their first Native designer dedicated to the brand and do work for them. And so I only applied to one college, which was U of O, because Nike was actually created there from students. And so knowing that history, I was like, I'm going to U of O, applied, got in. First day of college, I remember, or first day of my orientation, I remember going up to my advisor and asking them, well, what major do I have to choose to work for Nike and design for Nike? And then they told me product design was the major. So applied, got in the following year, went through the program. And ironically, as I was going to school at U of O, there's this program called Youth Movement. So Youth Movement was created by students, student-led. Jesse Schwartz created it. I'm actually part of it now as a board member, which is amazing. But it was basically a student-led organization that created a field day. So they brought in all the local res kids and Native kids from the Pacific Northwest and Northern California, and they bring them to U of O campus to do a field day with the kids and basically encourage, wellness, sport. We do field games with them all day. We do sections where we teach them about higher education with our Native advisors. So, it's just a day to give back to the community and really focus on our youth and empowering them. And ironically, every year, Sam McCracken, who is the GM of N7, does a talk, is a guest speaker and keynote speaker for the event. And so since my freshman year, every time I saw him, I saw it as an opportunity to present myself and introduce myself. So I did, thanks to my friend Delson, who was a community member up there who introduced me to Sam, because I was so intimidated as a freshman. And every year after freshman year, I just kept making myself apparent to Sam, saying like, hey, I want to be your Native designer. What do I have to do? As I was going through my school years. And then I eventually ended up applying for the internship and became the 2017 N7 intern, where Sam actually presented me with a project of designing my own collection with Taboo that would go into the market. And so that was, as an intern, you don't get those type of opportunities, which is where I say like the N7 internship, you get real experience, which was probably my reality check to the real world of designing. And so I got to design with him, tell his story. And then I actually didn't get hired right away after my internship. I actually went back home for a while and I got a job on the opposite side or on the other side of N7, where I actually worked for a nonprofit that gets grant money from the N7 fund. And so they get funded by the N7 collections and the fund that we have at Nike. And so I became a cultural teacher for my community for the Pathways program in Flagstaff. And so I was an after school program for the Native kids in the area. And I just basically helped them with their homework. I was a cultural teacher, so I helped do arts and crafts with them and teach them about their culture through storytelling, if it was, creating a play. So anything like that, I helped with the kids just to, invest them more into their cultural arts and just their culture in general to help them learn more. And so during that job, I actually ended up leaving early and kind of in a way just was like risking it all of just quitting my job and moving to Portland so I could possibly get a job up there and present myself and just be there in the area in case they needed me. But simultaneously at the same time of quitting my job in Flagstaff and just deciding to move up and figure it out up there, I had a job offer for Nike, and they presented me a full-time job for N7, becoming the design lead as well as a graphic designer for Nike. 4 years later, now I'm about 4 years into my job, and I actually was promoted to a footwear designer. So now I'm doing, did graphic work for the couple of seasons, which I'll tell these stories in a second. But now my job this past year just got promoted, is actually making footwear for Native people. So with that in mind, my goal for my next part of my career is to really cater to the Native foot and making sure that, we're solving solutions and just also just making footwear for our people. So it's a little bit about me and my career up until this point. So getting into the workshop now, culture, sport, and design, just getting into storytelling. So there's multiple different types of storytelling, depending where you go. Specifically, I'll talk about design storytelling. But I think when you think of storytelling overall, like I said, it's nothing new to our people. Our people have been doing storytelling for so long. And I mean, you hear it when you go back home to our communities, the stories that they say, or just even word of mouth, like just even gossip is a form of storytelling, which is kind of funny. But the way I learned how to storytell and the way I do storytelling at Nike comes back to the way my great grandma taught me. So my great grandma, Phoebe Nez, I'll go more into her story later into the presentation. But when I first learned how to rug weave, my great grandma, she taught me that everything has a purpose and meaning in each rug. Every color, line, shape, form, it all tells its own story. And all the stories together come together to tell a holistic story. And so there's an element that doesn't, fit in the story, doesn't tell the story correctly, or in a way it just muddies it up, then there's no purpose for it, because that's not part of the story. And so she always talked about the intentionality and being mindful of how you tell a story and how you go about it, because like, if you don't do it right, it can go wrong. And so it's just being really, thinking about those little details of how it comes to life. And so when I think about design storytelling, I think about the same things of applying those storytellings, if it's shape, line, form, color, texture, it all goes back to the basics of design elements. And so looking at the elements of design, basically the tools of to make art. They're line, shape, form, color, values, part of color, texture, and space. And so they say that these elements are basically the fundamentals. And so for me, looking at the way that I design, especially at work, we don't do everything. Like I don't do the whole collections by myself. Like that would be just way too much work and a lot on my plate too. Like it's just too much designing, especially in different areas. And so we break it down too. And I think that's also a good way of doing it. So if you were to break it down into subcategories of design to storytell, you could do shape and line, which could tell a graphic story, because shape and line is basically the language of design. So the symbolism, because that's something too people I think forget when it comes to design, that design is its own language. It tells stories through symbolism, through color, through shape, form, like my grandma said. And so I look at it as like breaking down the elements. Shape, line equals the graphic story. And then going to the next one, color and value. So really looking at the hues, looking at the shades that you pick would lead into the color story. And then the next one, space and form. This one is basically what I do for work, is like really thinking about, like, since I do footwear at work, like how do I create a shoe that represents, a certain topic? And so that would lead into the design of the story. So for me as a footwear designer, it would be like, how do I change up? Do I add overlays? Do I remove pieces, panel pieces? Do I change a lacing system? And so that would be an example of how you do a design story. And it can change depending on what you're designing. Say if you're a rug weaver, space and form could be a completely different way than shoes. In that space, it'd be like, well, what am I going to make today? Am I going to just make a saddle blanket? Am I going to make a rug dress? Or am I just going to make a rug, a floor rug? So even in that way, really thinking about how you're going to express your story and how you're going to tell it through its space and form. And then the last one, texture, pretty straightforward. Texture is a material story. So really thinking about textures of what you see as well as what you feel. That can go back to materials like such as wool. Wool would tell like a rug story. You could have satin, you could have silk, you could have lace. So there's a bunch of different materials that you could use. And even, for example, like taking it one step further, like could you do color changing materials? Like that's been a new popular thing in today's mainstream materials. This is what I meant by the element of design, is the tools to make. So you can see right here, line, shape, form, color, value, texture, and space. And then they have, you can see right here, all the, the more detailed definitions of what each one means. So just like I said, breaking it up into shape, line, graphic story, color, value, color story, space, form, design story, texture, material story. It helps you kind of narrow down each area. So because I think overall, if you try to just tell a story, it gets very overwhelming really quickly, because there's so many elements you could do, so many elements you can connect. And I think breaking it down into those 4 categories really helps you focus and even give the attention to detail that you need for each element in storytelling. I'll show, so the next two, I'll show you two examples of how I've done storytelling through Nike and through N7 specifically, and, used elements from our culture and our community to tell these stories and the messages that we were trying to send with them. So the first story I actually did was the Pendleton collection. So when I first got hired officially by Nike, it was the anniversary of our Pendleton collaboration that we did, which was, they did originally a Pendleton blanket way back then when the first collections first came out through N7. And so on the anniversary, Sam, as a new designer, gave me a kind of like a test. He was like, I want to see what you can come up with. I want to see what you can make, from this. Like, I'm not going to tell you what to do, like come up with a story and let's see what you do. And so I, kind of was like overwhelmed. I was 23 at the time when I was hired at N7. And so I was a little like, okay, well, let's see what I can come up with, just fresh out of college and things like that. But the stories that I kept going back to was like looking up to for me, I like to do a lot of research. So I looked into the history of Pendleton and learned more about their background and where did they learn the craft? What was their relationship with the natives and the communities, our communities? And I came across this research where they had someone from Pendleton spend 6 months in the Southwest, working with the Navajo, Zuni, and the tribes in the Southwest. And that's where they also learned more about blanket making. So I was like, okay, well, we're originally rug weavers in our tribe. So is there a way to, tell that story of the intersections between Pendleton and our native community? Because historically it goes so far back. And so I also wanted to dedicate it to the rug weavers to, also recognize them for the craft and how amazing and how monumental their craft has been, because, in the last few years that I've been learning more about our native community, our rug weaving has inspired circuit boards. It's inspired geometry. I mean, people study our design language because it's so ahead of its time and it's so just amazing. And so that's where with the storytelling, I was like, okay, well, I'm going to focus it on my tribe, specifically Navajos and Diné people. And then I was given this quote, and this quote just, expanded more of what I wanted to talk about. And I remember it was called, there was this athlete, he said, the way we play is the way we feel, standing out and being flashy. And so the way that I interpreted that quote was, the more that I wear my native designs and the more that I represent my community and my culture, the more confident I am in my own identity and in myself, which makes me play harder, makes me play better. And so that's where, as Native youth, our representation has gotten so much better over the years. And I remember growing up that you never saw Natives anywhere, or you never saw our designs anywhere, or authentic designs anywhere, I should say. And so from reading that quote to going back to my community, I came up with the idea of, well, let me tell our story of our people who, connect us back to our people, which was our grandparents, our grandmas. And I thought, like, everyone has a person in their family that recognized them and saw them for who they were, and also instilled this pride in them to fight for their people, to, do everything they can to keep our culture alive. And I just wanted to instill that connection that we have to our community, as well as to our elders and our families. And so I did the story based off of my great grandma. So I wanted to talk about my connection to my great grandma, who encouraged me to be the native designer that I am, and just, reference that relationship of her, because if you knew her, she just was such a kind, helpful person. She was the definition of what a community member should be. And I felt like her story and her legacy, unfortunately, she passed away when I was a freshman in high school. I wanted her legacy to live on, because I knew so many people who talked about her and talked about what she did on the res. And so I wanted that story to, having that story with my connection to my grandma, I knew other people would recognize that connection and have that same type of relationship. So breaking it down even more, getting into the color story for the collection. I don't know if you guys have ever seen this, but if you're familiar with our swap meets and going to gala, people actually sell these beautiful displays of how naturally we dye our wool to make our rugs. And so going back to authenticity, I think when it comes to storytelling, what makes a great storyteller is being so detail oriented and, taking the time to do the research and taking the time to do as much, intentionality as you can. And so for this, I was like, okay, well, we're working with wool, then we have to go back to how we dye wool, because even thinking about historically, like the weave designs that we did before we had commercial dyeing, like looking at the colors that we were achieved from the land that we, the land and the plants that we have on our land. And then to looking at the commercial dyes that we got after trading and how that even amplified our own designs and our rug designs. Just going back to that and, you know, wanting to reference these colors and this, you can see the color palette that we used at the bottom and how you can see the colors match it. And I think this is what, you know, what I mean by when you tell these stories, it means so much, because I had a community member after the collection was released by N7, this yellow, they told, like I had someone come up to me and was like, as soon as I saw the yellow, I thought tutadine and our corn pollen. And that's what I mean is like, you know, when you do the elements the correct way, people can see what you're talking about. Like when I thought about these two colors, the blue and the off-white type color, I thought of this as like sheep wool, or even like the blue skies of Monument Valley against the clouds. And that's how I saw the colors come to life. And I'll explain the colors and how they come into the story of the blanket and later in. But this is kind of like how we came up with the color story, was just really authentically looking at our dyes and looking at these plants and how can we take inspiration from them. And then for the graphic story, like I said, I use my grandma as a reference, and just kind of just, I might get a little emotional telling this just because I love her and she means so much to me. And this story, like I said, I wanted someone to really represent home for me. And so this is my great grandma, Phoebe Nez, who is incredible. And this rug in the center was also another, like looking at the color story, you can see right here, these colors. And these were some of the colors that she used in her Chiefs blanket that I actually have. And, you know, even thinking about these colors and how she achieved them and how she even weaved and the weave design she did. And so when I thought about the graphic story, I wanted something to talk about. When I made the blanket, I wanted it to be rooted in tradition. And so almost like it was rooted in tradition, and as it expanded out of the blanket, you know, it showed how modern our community has gotten with the designs and the stories that we told. So she was really known for her saddle blankets, and she loved doing the storm pattern design. And so I wanted to incorporate the storm pattern into the Pendleton blanket to represent her, because, you know, she talked about overcoming challenges and talked about, like, no matter how bad things can get or how hard things can be, like, you know, almost in a way like the storm comes, but it will always clear out. And she always talked about things like that, of just like, there'll always be good. And she was so positive. And that was just something that for me personally, I just wanted to put in here, because I think everyone has a tie or some type of relationship to a family member or a community member. And so going into the graphic story, like I said, I wanted to incorporate the storm pattern to represent her specifically. And then you can see right here, it says a traditional design. This is what Pendleton actually released, was a traditional design of Navajo weaving. The storm pattern features zigzags to represent lightning and corner squares to symbolize the four sacred mountains of the Navajo Nation. And that was something too. I really wanted this blanket to represent our land, you know, represent the land and the people that come from it. And so in the center, you can see the 3 generations back and 3 generations forward, and us in the center. So that's a symbol that we use a lot on N7, and it represents, you know, recognizing the 3 generations before you and 3 generations after you, and you have an impact on 7 generations. You can take the wisdom from your elders and apply it, and it can help teach the children and teach your future generations. And I think with this collection, that's something that I exactly wanted to represent with my grandma, was the teachings of my great grandmother, and, you know, her applying it to my grandma, and then my grandma applying it to my mom, and then my mom instilling it in me. And now I'm instilling it into the next generations. And those are things of just intergenerational wisdom being passed down. And that's what I really wanted the center to symbolize, was just at the center of our community is our elders, and they hold all of our knowledge. They hold all of our wisdom and our teachings. And as the blanket expands out, it shows, you know, the modern designs that we created. The Dazzler was actually a design that was created from commercial dyeing, because we got more colors and we're able to create more design language based off of using more colors. And so that was something I wanted to represent too, was that, you know, our people are evolving as we learn more tools and get more equipment and resources. And then this part right here, you can see it's on both sides. I wanted this to represent Monument Valley and the red rocks and the mountains of our land, to represent the landscape. And then the clouds and the blue skies that, meet it at the horizon. And then also with this step pattern, I was always raised that the step pattern represents, going through things like, you always go through ups and downs, but you always overcome them, was what I was always taught. And so just wanting to put all of those design motifs in it, like I could represent the land, but also represent something too that was a teaching that we learned from those symbolism of the steps. And so this side is just the opposite colors. But yeah, this is basically what the graphics ended up becoming and the meaning of the blanket. And yeah, so that's, I always get choked up about it because it's, it's telling my great grandma's story. And so going to the next slide, this is actually the full collection. I was actually part of it, which was really exciting. I never thought I would be part of something like this, but it was just looking at modern matriarchs, people in our communities who are uplifting. We had 3 generations of lacrosse players from the Onondaga Nation, Kahara, Serene. I mean, like everyone here is some type of leader in the community in some type of way. And that was something that I loved about this campaign, was like all of these lovely ladies. And I mean, it was incredible to like feature a woman forward brand or campaign, I should say. And just even going more into the footwear, the one that I would say, like, this is how all the footwear was made to match the blanket. And I think this one, focusing on the mock, was something that every collection we try to do a one-off that, isn't like a typical Nike shoe, isn't this classics. It's something that's new and inventive. And so with this mock, it's actually called a mock at Nike too. It's kind of funny. And so when I designed this with my designer, I actually brought in my traditional moccasins and showed, how I wrap them, how I put them on, the materials that we use. And based off of working with her, this is the concept that was created. And I mean, it was such a beautiful shoe. And it's like the perfect, like, lounging shoe. When I thought about this shoe, I thought about like, this is the type of shoe our grandmas would wear around the house, like, that everyday slipper. And it is like such a great, comfortable shoe. And it's meant for wider feet too, which is perfect. And that's something too, even elevating the storytelling. The shoes here are all wider shoes to help our feet. As Native people, we have wide, flat feet, and not every shoe is catered to our structure. And so that was something big. I had actual Native people, I had Navajo people especially, tell me how much they wanted a Pegasus shoe because that's their favorite running shoe because it doesn't hurt their feet. So, listening to the community speak, that's what we have to do. And I think that's what makes storytelling great, is that, at the end of the day, it's not about you, it's about how do you tell these stories? How do you, listen to the people and listen to what their needs and wants are? Because at the end of the day, design is just basically, looking at what's around us and adapting to our environment. And so, yeah, great campaign. This one was amazing to do. And I mean, even to the impact of afterwards. After the collection was made, we did a talk with Teen Vogue. It was incredible. All of us had such great, a platform to speak about our modern matrix and speak about the work that we do. And one thing that I thought, full circle to go back to why this storytelling is so meaningful is, I don't know if you guys are familiar, but with the Adopted Native Elder program, but so my great grandmother, Phoebe, was part of the program. She was one of the first people to be part of it. And so since then, our whole family has been involved with it. We help with the food runs. We actually host a food run at my house, at my great grandma's house, my Nullies. And, my whole life, I've always known my family's been part of that program since my great grandmother's, and other family have been part of it. And after we created the collection, I donated one of our Pendleton blankets to the program to thank them for all the work that they do with our Navajo elders, and just also the time that they spent with my great grandma and helped her with everything that she did. And so we did this whole ceremony, and I actually went to Park City, and Linda wanted me to present it and even like explain to the elders. Like, we actually sat all the elders down and I told the story of Phoebe's designs and just like how she inspired me to do my own blanket with her. And it was so emotional because Linda, you can see on the picture on the right, she actually gave me and my grandma, you can't see my grandma's face right here, but she's right here. But she actually presented us, we didn't know this was going to happen, but she gave us all of these photos that we've never even seen of my great grandmother over the years. And she gave us the first rug my grandma actually made for the program. She gave us all of these gifts back and all of those stories that, she has in those. And it was such an emotional time because, we didn't know about those things. And it was just such a surreal moment of just like sharing back and forth and, just sharing my great grandmother's story. And this is the type of impact I think when you do storytelling like this, like, I mean, to the point where I remember when the collection first came out, I was looking online and people were like, oh my gosh, Grandma Phoebe, I remember her. And I just was so shocked because I was like, I don't know who you are. Are you my cousin? Are you my family? Like, or like, how do you know my great grandmother? And that's the impact that these make, is like, when you tell the story right and do it a good way, there's just good things that happen afterwards. And with this story, it's one that makes me emotional just because there's so many elements of it, of even to the point where I never actually finished weaving with my great grandmother on our first rug we weaved together because she passed away. So I couldn't finish it. And so those are things that, full circle, I finally weaved this rug with her and for her. And her legacy lives on with it, which is something that, I'm very happy to have been part of and help tell. So my second story that I did, I know this is all kind of emotional day for me, but the second story, really quick, I'll probably save questions till the end, just because there's so much, and you'll start to see the patterns of how to use storytell and use these, the 4 elements of graphic, color, design, and materials. So I'll just answer all the questions at the end, because I'll even take you guys through a workshop of how to use storytell together. So just so I can get through this and not lose my train of thought. But my next story I'm going to tell was our summer 2020 collection. This collection came out during COVID, which was a very wild time. And, everyone remembers, and it was really difficult. But before we knew COVID was going to happen, and we had no idea this was going to come out, ironically, during the same time, this collection was focused on mental health. And we never knew at that time everyone would be so hyper focused on mental health. So it came at a time that I think everyone needed this. And so the background story for this was, when I started thinking about a new project, at the time I was actually going through surgery. I had extensive knee surgery to the point where I was bedridden for 3 months, not being able to walk or anything, just to heal. And it's been about a 2.5 year journey, which has been crazy. But I was bedridden for 3 months. So I started this collection 3 days after I had surgery, just because I needed something to keep my mind busy. I, didn't have anything else to do. I just needed to focus on something. Like I said, keep my mind busy. And so I started thinking about this one statistic, and it was talking about, by the way, I just wanted to say before I even get into this, trigger warning, I will get into mental health conversations and some statistics. So I just want everyone to be aware before I say anything. And but this one statistic that just could not stop, I couldn't stop thinking about it, was, unfortunately, our teen suicide rate was so high compared to the national average. And I couldn't get over it, because the way I thought about it was, how am I supposed to inspire youth and encourage youth to do this stuff if, unfortunately, they're taking their lives before they even reach adulthood and, can live out their dreams and do what they want. And it just broke my heart, because I was like, we need to talk about this. We need to bring attention to this, because this is a serious issue that's affecting our community, and we can't, ignore it. And so I started thinking about a way to talk about this. And this is where storytelling, I think, how do you do storytelling the right way? This topic could easily go in a negative route and cause a lot of harm, and also cause a lot of, triggering. And so how do you tell a topic like this in a way that, you can almost in a way control it where it doesn't, unfortunately, become a downer? And so the only way I could think of approaching this topic was working with my friend Shay. So Shalene is right here. So Shalene is part of the Native Wellness Institute. And so she lives here in Gresham. I'm just in Portland, so very close neighbors. And we became friends over the years of me working at Nike. And so Shalene and Josh, they're part of NWI, as well as the 20-something project, and which is just aimed to helping 20, 30-year-olds, 20, 30-year-olds solving 20, 30-year-old problems. And so I actually went to her house and I asked her, I was like, hey, could you take me through a workshop of how you guys, help talk about mental health in the community, because they're actually community leaders who go into Native communities to help heal through trauma, intergenerational trauma and things like that. And so I was like, okay, well, I'm going to go directly to the actual healers and do a workshop with them to understand more about mental health. And so I did this workshop with them, and I couldn't believe, like, I had just met Josh that day and I was crying. And there was things I was opening up about that I never knew I held down, and it was just like all coming out. And it was such a safe space, the way they took me through everything and just supported me. And afterwards I felt so good, and I was like, wow, so this is how you guys do it. And it was just rooting us back into tradition and rooting us back into community and culture, and just going back to our teachings and how do we traditionally heal, and how do we traditionally solve these problems. And I was just so mind blown by them and the work that they do, because I could feel that I was healed a bit in some places. And I mean, that's where I started thinking more about, how do you do this type of design work, and how do we, make people feel like this from this collection. And so, listening to what they said of just like rooting it in culture, bringing it back to our communities, like going back to that, I started thinking about, okay, well, let's talk about intergenerational healing then. We talk so much about intergenerational trauma, but I think sometimes we forget about the healing side. And so Shay and them focusing on healing all the time, I was like, okay, that's something I probably haven't heard as much, is the intergenerational healing. So that's where we focus the whole topic on that from a design side. And then from there, what is intergenerational healing? What can support that and what represents that? And so when I started thinking about, as our community as a whole, not even just thinking about the US based natives, but like all of us across the Americas, like Canada, Mexico, US, Caribbeans, like we're all indigenous people to the Americas. We can't, separate ourselves, because that's what colonization did. And so I started thinking about like, well, healing has no borders. And I started coming up with that mindset. I was like, well, we never had borders that separate our people. So we never had those type of restrictions. And so as I started breaking down more and more of like, okay, well, healing has no borders, what does that mean? And then I started thinking, I was like, well, what is something that like helps us heal? And then, going to medicines, and, there's obviously traditional medicines, sacred medicines, like, cedar, sage, and those. And that was something I wanted to stay away from about. And that's something too, it's like knowing what to do and what is your place. I don't think it's our place to tell those very sacred medicine stories, because it's just not right. And so I started even thinking, I was like, well, what are those other plants in our communities that we use that, also bring healing in ways, if it's through teas, medicinal healing, if it, all other areas. And that's when we started, plotting out plants. And I'll go to this one first. But, that's where I ended up coming up with the plants of across the Americas. So like I said, healing has no borders. And so that's where we actually looked at the plants across the Americas, looking at what grows and what have we been used. Wild roses, dandelions. I mean, dandelions grow all over the world, but wild roses, specifically Canada. I mean, even looking down prickly pear, aloe, and yucca, looking at, our Southwest, different regions, and just like representing that. And how do we use these different plants to create medicinal medicines, teas, or just some type of healing in some type of way. And so that's where, these plants were the inspiration for the graphic story, and were rooted in that. And so from there, looking at these plants, as well as the message of, looking at, something calming and mental health, when we came up with the color story, that was something too, looking at the plants as a way to find color, but at the same time, like, what colors do we choose? And so as a team, we started thinking out like, well, when we're thinking about mental health, even color has a way of affecting your moods. And, if you do cool tones, you're more likely to be feeling more calm. And if you have brighter colors, you feel more energized or more awake, things like that. And so we really wanted this balance of, calming you down, but at the same time, having eccentric colors of brightness and, burst of color, because that's what you need, is that burst, like intergenerational healing of coming back into you. And so with the color story, that's where we, came up with. And if you see the graphics, like, you can see that we did things in a watercolor-esque look, because even thinking about the softness of the delicacy of how do we translate graphics, like I said, you don't want something super harsh and so bold that it almost comes aggressive. It can become aggressive compared to the rest of the elements. And so you want to make sure that you're holistically with all the elements of its graphic, color, all of them together, how do you work with that? And so we did a watercolor to delicately tell the stories and, tell those colors and blends of colors. And then even, like showing the pops of colors on the shoe, like everything's very neutral. And, but then there's the pops of colors right here that you see. And a cool part about these two materials, I'll get into the next slide, is we actually used a cracking suede. And so a cracking suede, it's kind of hard to explain, but basically this material can explain it the best. So the more that so right now it looks solid, but the more that you wear these shoes, the more the material starts to crack and the color underneath reveals. And so you can kind of see it like here. So this is basically how the shoe would look over time, is it'll start, another color will start to show underneath. And so the reason why we did that for materials, thinking about the materials we chose, because we used it was called a cracking suede, really soft colors too, going back to our community. We use a very soft leathers, buckskin, hides, things like that. That's something, part of our community, but also at the same time, the softness of it also conveys gentle and calming properties as well. So even bringing those feelings of mental health still into the storytelling of materials. And the thing that we thought of that would be really great to tell is like, as your healing story, as you work on healing yourself and your trajectory, your shoes change as you heal more. And so the more that you wear the shoes, the more the shoes start to crack and the colors start to reveal afterwards. And that was to symbolize that everybody's healing journey is different. Everyone heals differently in different ways, and you can't, you don't heal the same way, you don't heal the same time. And so everyone's trajectory is completely different. And also the way that the cracks move and like will be unique on every shoe, because everyone's journey was unique when they healed. And the more that they walk in those shoes, the more it starts to change in that way and represent that journey that they're taking. And we thought that was a really cool one. So I'm still trying to crack my shoes the more that I wear them, but it's a really cool material. And those are things that you can do to symbolize even more things of your journey. And even thinking about that, like post production, like if you make something, what is the longevity of it? Like what will happen in the future of it? Like where will it be in like 5 years, or where will it be in a couple of months, or things like that. Even thinking, how does the story change over time? I think that's something cool. If you have those resources to do that, it is a game changer and elevates your story to be, even longer, like it shows over time. And then adding more to the storytelling, these were all the people on the campaign who are part of the Native Wellness Institute. Just wanted to recognize them because they're all such amazing individual people, and the work that they do in the community is, life-changing. Like I said, they help intergenerational healing. And that's something that I think, needs to be recognized, is like all these great people, Chelsea, Josh, Tomas, Ashley, Thosh, Shalene, they're all great people. And one thing too, that I think this campaign was so successful about was, on top of, featuring them, learning from them, we actually went a step further and had lessons on YouTube. You can actually go to YouTube today and hear any of these talks by Tomas, Thosh, and Shay, and hear their lessons that they teach in their community. So these are all meditation practices that if you want to do, it's all Wellness in Motion under Nike's YouTube channel. But that was something that we did even further, was when we released the campaign, was even utilizing the community and helping them, showcase their craft at this mainstream level at our platform. And I couldn't tell you how amazing and how much great feedback we got from it, of like people saying like, thank you, I never knew I needed this, or I never thought of things in this way. And that's the thing about storytelling is, that's the point of it, is it teaches you and it helps, bring awareness in areas that you haven't heard of. My job, personally, the way I look at my job is I'm just a vehicle. I'm a resource to help elevate stories that aren't in the mainstream. I want to tell those stories of Native people that people haven't heard of, because guess what? Our stories are so unique and so different. And I think there's so much value in it. And that's, what I see is like right here, Shay and them showcasing their healing and their storytelling in that way. And so this project, I will say, is probably one of my favorites. I felt like, it came out in a great time. Unfortunately with COVID, it caused a lot of, mental health problems. But obviously we're not here to solve those problems. We can't solve them. but in a way we can bring awareness and we can, bring teachings to help you in ways. And I think that's, that's something that we can do. And I love to be part of that process. So one last activity before I end, but I want to take you through real time of creating a story to kind of show you loosely how the process works and just kind of like how I go about it in a way in real time. And so I just created this brief for us to take you through. But let's say create a story that represents your culture in a positive way. Let me think about that in a second. So, there's multiple ways I could go about this. Like, culture, specifically me, so the Navajo culture I'll focus on, and in a positive way. Okay, well, I could think of multiple positive things like in our culture. We could talk about the land, we could talk about family, community, we could talk about even breaking down even to more specifics like teachings. Like I could talk about prayers and say like the walk in beauty is a positive way and is a teaching that I could utilize. But I think one that would be really easy to understand, and I think we all know this in a way, is hummingbird. So I would say, let's say we want to use hummingbird as to storytell representing our culture in a positive way. I think we all have an encounter of like, we all unanimously know that like hummingbird is this precious, prosperous symbol that is a blessing whenever you encounter it. And I think like looking into hummingbird more, let's say the way that I personally look at hummingbird, I see hummingbird as a blessing and a person or a being that teaches you to reflect on life and teaches you to think about in the moment. I could think of like a situation where you're like going for a walk and you're kind of upset, you've had a hard day, you're thinking about the negative things, and then all of a sudden you come across like a hummingbird and it's in your face just flying with you. And for that brief second, nothing else mattered. All of that negativity that you had just went out your head. And you're just so focused on this little being of, being in the presence of it and being blessed by being in the presence of it. And it's just literally just kind of almost in a way humbles you and shows you like, hey, it's okay. Like you might be stressed, but like, it's not the end of the world. It's not that big of a deal. And I think in a way, the hummingbird represents that type of teaching of, thinking present and just also like kind of balancing out like, is this really that bad? And so let's say we go with hummingbird. Okay. That's the background of how it represents in a positive way to our people. So how do we translate that through design, color, materials, and graphic story? So breaking it down. So first thing I would do is I would look up a bunch of pictures of hummingbirds and, do more details of like more about the hummingbird. Like why did like show them flying? So you can see right here, you can see the wings moving really fast. Could that be some type of inspiration for something? I don't know. Looking at the colors, like, okay, there's greens, there's reds, there's multiple colors of hummingbirds. Specifically, I chose the ones that, in Navajo culture, we symbolize the most, which is the green and red one. And so, looking at this specific hummingbird and getting different iterations of it to show different, positions of it to try to understand more of the details. And then from there, like I'll look at the overall picture and then go a step further, like, okay, well, let me see the smaller details. Like, we as Native people, we value feathers. Okay, well, let's look at the feathers of hummingbirds, like from a microscopic lens. And let's look at these little details of the metallics and, the changes of colors. And then even to looking at how they lay on each other and like they create this like, create this interesting form with these line languages. I mean, even here you can see it and see like the lines that they create when you see them up close. And then also even thinking about the iridescentness of it, like how they change colors depending on how the light hits them, are those elements that we could all bring into the design stories, like if it's color, graphics, materials. And so I'll just do like a mood board of just everything and just, start to like dial deeper and like go into more details of categories within it. And then from there, looking at color, I'll, for example, use these two photos. So these two palettes come from this photo, and then these two palettes come from the bottom photo. And that just to show like the differences of color stories that you could tell depending on what you reference. So with this one, you know, the colors are so much more brighter and bolder, and you can see that with this red and with these greens. And then this one, on the other hand, I mean, there's an orange color in there that, you know, is kind of unexpected, but you can see it right here with the reflection of when it changes. And so all of these 4 colors, you know, these are 4 different stories that you could tell in color. And choosing which one will just determine on what best supports the graphic story, the material story, the design story, and overall the whole story. So that will determine which one we choose, because all of these are all authentic to the hummingbird. It's just choosing which ones you think would symbolize the collection the best. And so going into the next section of storytelling, graphics, like I said, looking at the wings, like, could that be some type of symbol of that we could, you know, convey in some type of like graphic style? I'm not sure, you know, maybe that's something we look into and start like sketching. But one thing that I think really authenticates when you do your style of graphic work, if you're working with a culture, is authentically going to the culture and looking at how they create graphics. And so specifically, I looked at, because of looking at the detail of the wings and the way that the wings lay, I kind of thought, okay, this kind of reminds me of stamp work. And so, you know, stamp work is traditionally something that we've done in our silver work. And as a silversmith, I recognize that, and I can see those stamps and how each stamp, you know, you add them together can create a bigger story. And so thinking about that, like, how can I use, like, for example, these shapes of stamps? And we all, if you're a silversmith, you would know that, you know, you can buy these pre-made stamps and symbols and then just, you know, create basically an image from it, from the individual work. And so like looking at these and how they're very similar to the graphic or to the feather style, like how could you maybe use these symbols as a way to come up with a graphic story similar to like how this composition is? Like, could you use this type of graphic style to create a composition that represents the hummingbird story, or that positive, you know, it representing it in a positive way? And so, you know, ideas for graphics. And then for materials, you know, like I said, I talked about the layering of, or the metallicness of the wings. And so thinking about that with materials, like, could you use a metallic material that has color changing iridescent elements to it? Or even thinking about the shape of these wing patterns, and like, could you make some type of cutout that almost looks in a way scaly? Because like I would never have expected their wings to look scaly in some type of way. But is there a way that represents it, you know, not like snakeskin like scaly, but actually represents the actual feather layering? And then, like I said, going back to tradition, going back to culture, and, you know, looking at cultural, like cultural things. Like I said, you know, velvet is one thing that, you know, is so big in our community, traditional clothing, you see it all the time. Is there a way to bring velvet into this collection or into this story? Looking at the color changings of it, like, you know, two tones, like, you know, you look at it one way and the color change is no different than, you know, the feathers. Is there a way to bring velvet in as a material in, and that would authenticate the Navajo story of the hummingbird? And then depending on your resources, going one step further of, okay, well, I like this pattern, I love the way that it looks, could I create my own material that is like, say this is a suede, you can see it's a suede with a pattern in it, all the negative space is the suede cut out. Could you create some type of graphic all over pattern that could be implemented into a material, and therefore you know, have this specific material that is velvet but also is your graphic? So depending on what resources you have, you could also create your own material and go a step further and do something like that. And then at the end, you know, holistically bring all the elements back together. This is kind of like what your storyboard would be, of like, okay, well, we're focusing on the hummingbird. I want to do the graphic style, looking at the wing shape. I want to do it in a stamp design style graphic look, whatever that might be, and translating it out. And then I want to do the materials I want to reference are velvet, because traditionally, you know, we as Navajo people wear velvet, but also with the color changing elements on the hummingbird, you know, I could see this representing that. And then choosing the color palette that you want to work with. I could see like this material, the velvet, maybe being these two tones that, you know, it could translate to those, or even like a different color. And then, you know, maybe this red and black will be how the graphics are placed, or maybe it's a blue background, and the graphics are done in black, just like how we do our stamp work on silver pieces, like that two-tone color. So that's kind of like how you come up with a story in real time. So this was very loose and fast, but kind of how I kind of think about it, and my ideas go about when I start to, do more research, start to think more about it. But, coming back to the culture, I think just rooting it in elements that we know about will really help and help solve the story. But this is my last slide. So thank you, everyone. And also happy to answer questions now. I can turn off my screen so you can see me.
Thank you, Tracie. Everyone can go ahead. If you have a question, you can put it in the chat window, or feel free to unmute yourself, turn your video on or off, and ask your question. Okay, Tracie, there's a question that came in for you from the chat from Kelsey from Happy Accidents Media. And she says, on social media, there's a lot of focus on supporting small businesses and inspired natives, not native inspired, and inspired natives, not native inspired. So working with a major company, do you come across negative comments about selling out, in quotes, your cultural designs? And if so, how do you deal with that negativity?
I mean, I think, yeah, I've gotten negativity. I mean, no matter what you do, you're going to get some type of negativity with anything. But at the end of the day, I'm respectfully working with community. I mean, I always, at my job, when I first got hired, I let people know, hey, the Indian Arts and Crafts Act of 1990 is a law that we have to abide by. And I brought awareness to that at work. And it's just because personally with my family, we sued a company for stealing our designs. So we personally growing up, having to, my family go to that lawsuit and validate ourselves, prove ourselves in court that we were the creators of that. I understand that type of copying. And so that's something, if, with me at Nike, if I can be there as a resource to stop things before they even happen, and, explain and educate people like, hey, this isn't okay, and this is the reason why. I mean, it's been amazing at N7 because we include a lot of natives part of the process. Like if we don't have a native person in the job that we need, we externally hire someone. I mean, Chelsea, you saw her on the campaign. She does a lot of our copy because she's so amazing with writing. She went to school for it. And she does, we don't have someone to do a lot of our writing at work. And so we externally reach out to people in the community to help us with that, because at the end of the day, we need our people part of the whole process. And so I think those are things that, not a lot of people know about that we do at work, and we don't always, show so much consumer facing, but those are things that we do, I don't want to say on the low, but we do all the time with each collection. And also like answering to, like going back to it, it does hurt. I mean, I got into this position at 23. I'm 27 now, so it's been about 4 years. And I took things really personally. At one point, I thought the community hated me. But at the same time, like, you can't, if you make a mistake or if you, come to a problem, at the end of the day, you have to realize that we're the first people in these positions. Like, we're going to make mistakes. We're going to, fall down, and we're going to have to get back up and keep trying, because at the end of the day, this is not how we always worked, but we're learning these positions. Like I said, I'm the first Native person to be in this role and to understand how corporate designs was completely different. But at the same time, I indigenized it in a way and, created Indigenous storytelling through it, and has been doing it respectfully. And I love it. And, for me, the way I check in is I look at the community. People be like, oh, what did you think of this collection? I'm like, don't tell me. I don't want to hear what I think. I want to hear what you think. Like, how do you think it went? And, getting that feedback. I listen to a lot of the people, on social media. I listen to what they say, good and bad feedback, because you need all of that to really help you understand what you're actually doing. And I think like having community members who message me, like to the point where, hey, Tracie, we want a Pegasus shoe. Can you get one in the collection? Like, I can't respond back, legally, but I can take that consideration of, they want this, so why can't we incorporate this? And that's my job, is to listen to the community and imply everything that they want into the collection as much as I can do. And so that's what I try to do as much as I can in my power.
That's fantastic. And we have another question from Akimi, and she says, how do you source native screen printers and the materials that you use to create your designs?
Screen printers. I was like, I have to think about that question, the way she wrote it. Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, like I'm pretty involved with the, the design community and the fashion community. Like a lot of the people are my friends. Like I'm friends with OXDX, Jared, Section 35, Urban Native Era, Joey. Like we all talk, and we all have conversations. And that's the thing, it's just like working together to create opportunities. And for me personally, I want to create opportunities for people who haven't had a platform yet, who haven't had the opportunity to design at that level yet. And so for me, that's where I try to bring that expertise of design or into in seven of like, hey, let's look into community. Hey, what about these artists? And it is different once you get into corporate, but that's the future of what we want to do. It's just involve more community members. And how do we do that? And like I said, like being 4 years into this, I'm starting, I just got promoted to a new position, which means I have more responsibilities and hopefully more power that comes with that. And I'm expressing all of those, and the more I talk about it, I think the more it'll happen.
Cool. I love that. And
I have a question.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
This is Denise, Denise McClellan.
Oh,
I had
hi.
emailed you, Tracie, a while back with my questions. It's such a pleasure to meet you. And I wanted to say that I guess since the launch of N7 brands, I was not a fan of Nike at all. Mm-hmm. And my son turned me on to like the N7 brands, and I have like the first collection with the leather. I don't know what the name is, but it has twists at the toe area. Mm-hmm. And I also have one of your collections, which is the Air Force One low Pendleton design. Mm-hmm. And I have the Nike Free Forward moccasin as well. And I want to get the purple low Nike shoes. That's my next endeavor. But I did want to say that I'm so thankful that you actually brought out and kind of shared your design process of how you do it. It's super, it was nice to see how you incorporated how your family has brought some like magnified the silversmithing aspect of it too, because that's our industry as well. But I did want to ask, and it's really nice to know that Nike has a way of giving back to the community, and that way, and in that respect, it's nice to see how Nike has evolved into giving back to and giving and highlighting culture. Mm-hmm. And how they're we follow the ambassadors, the ambassadors. I think my favorite is Brooke Simpson. She's an actor, musician. I love her music, by the way, because I love to dance. But it's just mind-boggling how this multi-billion-dollar athletic fitness corporate business is giving back to the community. And that's a big part of Navajo Expressions team, which is our business, of helping other people in our community, artists. We've been buying from artists like finished handmade products, and for years, some of them we've been buying for 25 years, others we just barely met. And we've had this long continued relationship to help. Mm-hmm. And I see like your position and how influential it can be and how impactful it can be to opening light to uncomfortable conversations as to inclusiveness and being able to like bring light to diversity in the world. I'm saying the world because this is like you have a huge position to do that, and it's great to see how impactful you're making it for others, and you're kind of setting that standard for everyone in the corporate world, which is really nice. And so I had a question, and I know that fashion is an image-driven industry. Can you share maybe a time when you had experienced pressure and found yourself easily swayed to in trying to emulate like an image expectation that has already existed? And how did you stay authentic to that and stay true to your values and your platform?
Wow. Well, I just want to say thank you so much, Denise, for everything that you said. I mean, also love that you have those shoes. And I mean, to the point, everything you said is 100% valid, from the feelings you felt before to the feelings you have now, like everything. And I mean, that's something too, is like when I first came to Nike, I wanted to authenticate the brand. And you know, like I wanted to bring that level of storytelling that is authentic to our community, that because you can recognize when it's native done and when it's not. Let's be real. But I'll be real. When I came to N7, I had this idea of wanting to do something that was very different. I came in with with this notion, and it's still my goal personally and career in my career at Nike as well. It's just a personal thing that I have been really trying my best as a native artist. With my background, just a heads up, I've, you know, artisted of all traits, from my grandparents from silversmith to beading to all of that. And then I used to do the Herd Art Show, and, you know, got experience at, you know, young in my life. I used to do it when I was in college, and seeing the perspective there, like for me personally, I just really want to amplify native design and fashion in a place that it hasn't been. We know that native fashion is timeless. Like everyone tries to copy us, and everyone does all these different designs. And you know it's never going to go away. Like everyone loves it. And so I've been trying to think of ways of like, how do we modernize native design to the next level? You know, not doing what we do, you know, the same thing over and over again, but like, how do we take these elements of our culture and, you know, push them to the new level? You know, I think of, you know, I've been doing a lot of theorizing and a lot of research and talking to my grandparents and other elders of, you know, what is tradition and how tradition changes every generation. You know, my grandparents' generation, tradition was rug dresses. In today's world, you know, our new generation of kids see it as ribbon skirts and, you know, t-shirts made by native brands and native people. And so, you know, I think every time we're evolving into new areas. And I think sometimes, and this is where I kind of think of it, you know, society-wise, they try to keep us in this capsule of, you know, us in the 1800s, you know, basically our ancestors, and that's how they only see us as. And so when they want art from us, they only want that art. Because I've noticed, like, when you do art that's like more contemporary, you're not seen as a native artist anymore. You're a contemporary artist. And I think that's weird, because at the end of the day, regardless of the work you do, if it's native designs or not native designs, it's still native made. Because at the end of the day, a native did it. And so why do we have this, like, you know, thing where as soon as you start doing stuff that isn't traditional, you're not seen as a native artist anymore, as, you know, you're a contemporary artist at that point. And I just really want to, like, you know, I guess you could say push those standards and really challenge those areas of like, well, why can't we have a native person in Jordans that, you know, like, for example, the Nike Lyle Dunks wearing, you know, like some jewelry, like a wampum shell necklace, and wearing a, you know, a ribbons shirt. Why can't that be, you know, a modern day traditional look? And I think that's something too. It's like, okay, well, you know, just like how we got the commercial dyeing of yarns and we got the velvet from the velvet and silver from the Spaniards, what else, other tools can we get that, you know, push us into the next, you know, the next chapter of our evolution of adapting? So I kind of like, I know that's a really loose interpretation, but I think like that's what, you know, that unknown, because it hasn't been done before. And I think I use elements from, like, you know, say the 70s, like I love the 70s style of look. And, you know, you're seeing a lot of people today dressed like grandmas, and I love it. Like people my age dressed like grandmas with the handkerchiefs and everything. And I just, you know, I see all of these elements of fashion. And I think it's the reason why I'm all over the place is because, you know, when you look up a native person today on Google, you don't see us today. You see this 1800s version of us. And I think I'm trying to piece together all these parts of fashion, because if you said natives in the 70s on Google, you wouldn't find, you know, the style of 70s wear that you would find in other communities, you know, eras. You wouldn't see that type of stuff. So I think I kind of base it off of like my friends, you know, people in the community and what they talk about and show. And you know, I'm trying to bring all these elements together, and it's hard because what I'm doing is so brand new and different. And I think that's just the premises of, that's the base of what I do. So when I do like the Lyle dunks and things like that, I go back to the cultures, like how do we, respectfully, and that's something too, like working with Lyle directly, he told us like what can and can't be done. And as a designer, I have to listen. I can't be like, no, why not, questioning it. Cause like that's crossing the boundaries of storytelling, I think, because for me, the way I look at it, I'm a resource. I'm not here to tell what the story is unless it's my story to tell. But as a tool, as a person, a resource, I'm here to help elevate that story. And it's not mine to say what is and what's not. And so with that, like for this example, the dunks or even that collection with Lauren, I spent an hour with them talking to them, just not even asking them like, what's your favorite color? Things like actually getting to know them as a person. And I think that's what makes the storytelling very authentic, is like, it's rooted in authenticity because the person is telling it from their perspective. And I think like, even just translating that, like checking in with them, like when we did every time I do a collection, I have so many scrutinies that I have to go through culture, through advisors, legal, things like that, to making sure that we're not doing something wrong. And that's where we, incorporate a lot of people in the community. Of course, it's not so, consumer facing, but, we do that. And that's where I think like for example, with the dunk that you were talking about wanting to get, the braided swoosh, that was such an iconic moment, because if you look at the symbolism of what the braid represents with the boys, the braid, I mean, they've been chanted at lacrosse tournaments, cut the braid as a racist thing, and that goes back to colonization, goes back to assimilation, and it goes back to that horrible history. And to do a braided swoosh on a dunk, on the actual like swoosh, shows that we're bringing an icon such as the swoosh and a braid that's such a big symbol in our community together to symbolize that, hey, we can't do anything against this. This is who we are. This is what represents, and that resistance towards, unfortunately, those bad things that have been said. And, that was to show the pride in, the hair that we have, and to be proud of having that braid. And I think those are things that, I talked about it in a little bit, but I think that's what amplifies and modernizes us in design, is doing those elements of, like, how can I bring a braid and a swoosh together and create that? And who would have ever thought? And I think that's the future of Native design. I hope I answered that question right.
Oh my gosh, it was yes, and then some.
Okay.
It's interesting that you bring up the braid, because my son went to all through grade school with a braid, and he was judged in a lot of ways, but with his own convictions and him knowing that he was honoring his grandfather, that to him, that changed the very fabric of who he is. He was able to open that communication and say why, it's important to him. So thank you so much for that.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that story. And I mean, that's what I'm just trying to do, is like bring pride and bring authenticity. And honestly, I'm just trying to give our people a platform to showcase all of this amazing work, because I'm like, bro, people sleep on the Native community. Like, we have so much like to offer and so much to show, and I just want people to know how amazing we are.
We have two more questions here, and probably time to answer both of them. The first is from Shondine, and she says, do you have any advice for other young Navajo or Native women working in the corporate sector where there's a majority of non-Native folks?
Yeah. So I'll be real. So when I first got into corporate, I kind of had the mindset, being so young, this was my first job ever in the field, and kind of like, oh my God, I'm so lucky to be here. I'm so grateful. Oh my gosh, kind of in a way of like this opportunity doesn't happen, so I should be thankful, because you never know when it'll happen again. And as I started working more and more the last few years, I think it was about after my second year going on to my third year, I kind of started, like, I'll be real, not knowing how corporate works or the job force really is as an adult. I did so much more work than I needed to, because I felt like I needed to. I mean, as a person who only jobs I had were service, like serving as a hostess, as a busser, as an actual server at a restaurant, if you make one mistake, you're instantly fired. You lose your shot. And so I kind of thought about that. I was disposable like that when I first came into corporate, like, oh, not a lot of people like me get this opportunity, so I can't waste this. So I better show that I want this. I'm going to go far beyond. But at the same time, I'll be real, I exhausted myself to the point where I was so mentally and emotionally drained that I stopped doing my own personal art. I used to do art shows and go to like the Herd and not Santa Fe. I wish I got into Santa Fe, still trying. But I used to do like the art shows in Arizona, like Herd in them. And I just stopped doing art because I was just so mentally drained from working that I didn't have any other energy anywhere else. And then I started realizing, like, why am I doing so much more than I need to? Like, that's unnecessary. I mean, why do I feel like if I don't do what I'm supposed to, that's not enough? And I started to realize it was because I thought of myself as disposable. I thought I could be fired instantly, and that's not the case. And I'm very thankful to have a woman of color manager. I've had a lot of women and men of color as my management, which has been great because my first manager coming in was Filipino and Japanese, and he was Kobe's designer actually. And he taught me a lot. He came into the industry at 23 as well, and kind of, helped me. My next manager, she was actually the first Black woman to be the design director for Nike. Taught me so much. And then my new manager, she is a Caribbean Black woman who does such amazing work, and also even taught me like, hey, it's okay to make mistakes. Like, she's been the one who's really told me, like, you make mistakes, you learn from them, and we move on. That how else are you supposed to learn? You're not going to make everything 100% perfect. Like, that's not realistic, and that's not reality. And I started, like, with her and all of my managers guiding me, I started realizing that, like, I was being so hard on myself. I was telling myself I have to go farther beyond than what I needed to. And instead of thinking I'm so lucky to be here, I started changing my narrative to they're so lucky to have me here. Because as a Native person, one of the few in the company, they need you. They need that perspective. And from the work that I did these last few years, I realized that I've brought a lot of knowledge that they would not have known because they are not from our community. And in the design world, really thinking about sustainability and how traditionally we are sustainable. Indigenous people are invented sustainability. And those are things that, I've been focusing on, and knowledge I've brought to Nike and corporate that they wouldn't have had if it wasn't for people like me. And so I think, like, when you first get into corporate, you think you're so disposable and you think you're so lucky to be there. But then after a while, like, once you start to realize the work that you're actually doing and how much you bring to the table, and there's no one else like you, unfortunately, because, like, they don't always give other people opportunities, you are so valuable. You are one in a million. And that's something it took a while for me to realize. And that was something too, even as a company at Nike, we have 17,000 people who work on campus in Portland alone. Worldwide, thousands, maybe 100,000 people. And I'm one of the Native people on this company that's changing it. And yes, it might take a while to change in corporate, but you're one of the people who's challenging the system and bringing that perspective that really, really changes things. And, you're one person that will bring more. And that's something that I think about in corporate with me is I might be in 7 and being one of the, few Native designers at Nike, but my goal in the future is to have an actual team of Native designers, one in graphics, one in design, one in materials, and one in color. And I'm teaching them how to do this stuff and do this work. And, that's the future of it, thinking longevity. And, it is challenging, but I think just remembering your worth and your value really goes a long way, because it's so easy to get lost in corporate.
You have such a fabulous attitude about all of this. I wish we could just sprinkle and spread it all around. Okay, one last question from Graham, and he says, are there any plans to continue the Nike N7 Sports Summit?
Oh, I think so. I mean, obviously, I'm not in charge of all of N7. I'm not the general manager like Sam, but I think it was such a positive event that I think so in the future. I mean, I'm not sure what the planning is. No one's talked to me about it yet, but I think, like, with COVID, it has created some challenges, but I think they're trying to work through that. So I think in the future there hopefully will be. I'm not sure, but I mean, I think we've done it twice already. So that's already should give some good perspective of it being in the future, but I hope so. I really hope so, because even from the past sports summits, I felt like I learned and got to connect with so many people from the community, and even just those perspectives too, like talking to the individuals and, you know, hearing their expertise and helping me, and even vice versa, talking about how can we help each other. I hope so. Long answer short, I hope so. We need to.
Fantastic. Well, you have a ton of thank yous in the chat window, and I want to express our gratitude too at Change Labs for you coming and joining us. For those of you who like our workshop series, in 2 weeks, we're going to be talking about defining your ideal customer, which I think is a critical component of storytelling as well. So I hope you can all join us again in 2 Wednesdays at 11:30. And again, if you have any questions about Change Labs, here's the email address for my colleague, Marcia. And just a final thank you to you, Tracie, for joining us today and for just imparting all of this wisdom and knowledge, and for just bringing your amazing attitude and personality to this virtual room. I hope it spreads all around. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate y'all.
All right. Thanks everybody for joining. Hopefully see you in 2 weeks.